Will Kalen DeBoer be staying at Washington? We got a whole lot more extension talk.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Rome Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs help find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. And Lars, what better segue than a LinkedIn ad read just into more job talk? So you and I are in consensus that we don't think Kalen DeBoer is going anywhere, right? And, people will say what they will, especially in our YouTube comment section about all this, but we don't think Kalen DeBoer is anywhere. So with that being said, what do you think Kalen DeBoer's extension at Washington is going to look like?
I think it's going to be a probably 5 or 6 year contract that keeps him locked in for the long term. There's two keys aside from the obvious one that really are going to be what people need to look at in this extension when it comes out. The assistant salary coaches pool and the buyout for Kalen DeBoer moving forward, because the buyout, okay, I believe is somewhere around 12 million right now.
12 million, I believe right now.
Right. So somewhere in that range, I know. And I'm not saying it's going to go to the Jimbo Fisher level of 60, 70 million, because that's only Texas A&M does that. But I do think the more those schools see that low number, the easier it's going to be for them to say, hey, we'll give you 10 million. Kalen, here's a $12 million check that you can give to Washington, so you don't even have to pay it. And then we'll pay you, 10, 12 million to come coach in the SEC. In order to avoid that buyout's got to be 30, 40 million. I mean, I believe Gus Malzahn was the previous high of 21 million for a buyout, yeah, but at Auburn before Jimbo Fisher's contract in Texas A&M. So it's got to be north of 21, because Kalen DeBoer is even though he hasn't won a national championship, I think it's fair to say he's on the trajectory to be a national championship contending coach for years to come. That's why Washington wants to keep him, rightly so. With that same thing in mind, you have to make sure that schools would need to eat a significant chunk of a buyout, or pay a significant chunk of a buyout to get Kalen. And I think that's because right now, 10, 12 million, Auburn, I mean, they just got Hugh Freeze. But I'm saying, Florida, all these other schools in the SEC that kind of have endless money. And I mean, Texas A&M is obviously the one that has the real money. But that buyout is going to have to be north of 30 million at some point. Maybe not right away. Maybe it goes from 12 to 18 to 25. It kind of, increases as his time goes along. But I think it's also going to be just as important of a factor is what is the assistant salary coaches pool? What are the resources that Kalen DeBoer is going to have that Troy Dannen is going to give him, the Washington AD? And I think that's where the relationship has been growing, right? I mean, since Dannen got hired in early to mid-October, he knew from day one, I'm keeping Kalen DeBoer. There's no way I'm losing Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, we might have to change some assistants if Grubb gets a head coaching opportunity or things like that. But even if those opportunities arise, there's a way for Grubb to stay at Washington, maybe not get a raise, maybe get a little bit of a raise. But the point being, you just want to make sure that the coaches are all happy and have all the resources necessary from an NIL perspective, off the road, recruiting, just recruiting in general, right? Just recruiting budget being bigger, right? For visitors, staff going out and recruiting, becoming more of a national brand. Those are the things that truly matter more, because Kalen's going to get his money regardless. But I think Kalen DeBoer is the type of person to say, I will take 50 to 60 million instead of 70, 80, 90, these astronomical contracts the coaches are getting, in order to make sure the people around me who I want around me are here and able to stay and turn down other jobs until the right job comes around. I mean, Ryan Grubb is basically in the Kirby Smart mold at this point, where why leave unless it's for the perfect job, right? And I don't think
that makes sense.
And I think if you're Grubb, there's certain jobs. I mean, Iowa State, if Matt Campbell gets fired, it's a going back home sort of thing. Aside from Iowa and Iowa State, I mean, Minnesota doesn't check that box for me. I don't necessarily think if you're Ryan Grubb, do I want to go to Minnesota knowing what I've seen Washington build? I'm making $2 million a year here. I could wait for a truly elite job to open up a couple of years down the line after I've been even more established coordinator, got recruiting ties at a major Power 5 program. Because look at Grubb's resume. Everything has been like Kalen, where it's, NAIA, FCS, low-level FBS, but he's never even been a head coach. So it's kind of risky. And we've seen a bunch of coaches get first-time opportunities and not necessarily hit a home run with it. Kalen, aside from his Fresno time, he spent a lot of time at Sioux Falls. So it's not like this is his just third year in coaching in general. It's like, hang on, he's won multiple national championships at a lower level, but he's built cultures before and being able to sustain it. So I think it's just a matter of making sure all the boxes get checked, because this setup that Washington has right now with Kalen at the top is one of the better ones in college football. And I think it's going to start to show when the staff stays together moving forward.
No, absolutely. I think that really is what we need to consider here. We had so many people in the YouTube comments saying, "Oh, Texas A&M does what they want. They're going to come in with the bag, and that's going to be it." That's not necessarily the case here. You and I have both had talks with Kalen DeBoer on and off the record, just about a whole multitude of things. And every time you talk to him, he just seems like the kind of person that wants to build something, that wants to put his name on something, and doesn't just need a check. And that feels like one of the biggest things here, where he has put together a really, really good just coaching staff. And that extends beyond just the coaches. You talk about the recruiting analysts. You talk about everybody else that's in the building that just helps with the program too. He's done a lot of that, and he wants to make sure that he has every avenue possible that's open to him to help him win games. And that's what it's all about. He knows that it takes every single person in the building to do that. So for people like strength coach Ron McKeefrey, you talk about guys like Courtney Morgan too. Those are the people that he knows, I need this person to be paid really well. I need that person to be paid really well, because I know that they also need the best. And if that takes a little bit off on my end, fine. But I know everything around me needs to be perfect in order for us to win. And that feels like a really big, just like point of discussion here, because we can also talk about guys on the coaching staff that are making a significant chunk of change. And the first two you can point to, you talked about Ryan Grubb, and you can also talk about wide receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard, where that's another guy who seems to be in a really great situation here. And you don't think that he's going to end up looking for other jobs, especially from, conversations we've had with him, things he said on the record. He's just another one of the people that just feels like he would fit here for a long time if he wanted to. And it's just a matter of making him somebody like a Brian Hartline at Ohio State, where it's giving him a lot of money, just saying, yeah, you're going to do this, but you're going to do it at the highest level, and we trust you to keep doing that. So why aren't we going to reward you for that? And Kalen is the kind of person that seems to understand that. And I think that it's going to be really interesting, because we feel like it's just a matter of when this happens, not if at this point. And the biggest question is going to be, what do some of those numbers look like? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the other side of the break. We're also going to get into some of these other implications, because our buddy Christian Capel over at On Montlake put out some really great stuff the other day that is also going to help out a lot with this Kalen DeBoer extension. But first, we're going to give it a shout out to our friends over at LinkedIn, because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Maybe if Texas A&M used LinkedIn Jobs instead of just handing out the biggest check, it would have been a little bit different on the hiring front. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And before we move on here, it's now time for your game changer of the week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like, let's talk about Kalen DeBoer today. Much like Kalen DeBoer, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, just like Kalen DeBoer has totally changed the Washington football program in just over 2 years, and he's done a fantastic job with it. Athletic Brewing Company, their brews are great tasting and award-winning, and they beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. They brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, golden, sours, and more. And they're constantly releasing limited edition experimental styles to add to their variety. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All right, Lars. Let's start with the report from our buddy Christian. So Christian Cable wrote fantastic stuff, as he always does, over on Montlake. You should go subscribe to him if you don't. And one of the things that he put in one of his latest pieces was that there's a rumor going around on Upper Campus that President Anna Marie Kause and the Board of Regents is considering taking on the debt that Washington owes, as every school does through renovations and stuff like that, for the renovation of Husky Stadium. And that number, it was at $8 million for a while. And I know it's supposed to increase again here soon, is the amount owed per year. And if Upper Campus is able to just kind of take that debt off of the athletic department's hands, that opens up so much money for just kind of whatever it wants. But you can definitely see a lot of that going to football, as just, linking that with some of the comments that we've seen from Troy Dannen.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that also comes into play with future things as you're moving to the Big Ten and having to offset potentially not having as much earnings from the 2023 season, because Washington and Oregon State control the earnings, at least for the time being, for the season. And so I think it's a good win all around, right? Especially if Upper Campus, Washington is one of the biggest endowments on the West Coast, right? So I think knowing that not necessarily all of that is for athletics, like, hey, can the university do the athletic program a solid, given that the athletic program is bringing in a significant amount of attention and revenue and things like that? And with the move to the Big Ten, it's a good bet for the future, because to have that money and everything go away with that, now you're thinking, cool, our hands are clean, we can focus just on moving forward and not necessarily be tied down with this ball and chain of what we had to deal with in the past with the debt.
Right. And that's a really big move. It's a really smart move, because just moving to the Big Ten was already such a great choice from Upper Campus and the athletic department being able to work together and make that happen. But I think that there's also just so much to think about when it comes to what this means for the university going forward. Because if Kalen DeBoer, or when we believe this extension gets signed, that's going to mean a lot of future revenue for the school. And you're right. It's a good bet. And just saying, all right, yeah, we'll do this for you now, because we know what that's going to mean down the line.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of everything is a gamble, right? You're betting on Kalen DeBoer with this extension, thinking that it's not just a one-off with Michael Penix, right? Which we all know it's not, but like you're still making that bet, right? If you're giving him a massive extension and doing all these things, you're doing it because you have faith in the direction the program is going in. I mean, that's pure and simple what it is. And I'm not sure you're making that move if you're thinking, oh, well, hey, if Kalen leaves, maybe we'll go back to try and find another Kalen or promote somebody on the staff, Jamarcus or whatever. Like, you want them on the same staff. You don't want to have to lose one to get to save money and get the other way. It's like, you don't want to moneyball this. So yeah, it's the best way to go for Washington. And it's honestly the right move too. It's not just the best move, it's the right move. It's, how good of a person you have in Kalen. The support staff around him has handled everything perfectly. You got to reward him for it, because if you don't, somebody else will. We know for a fact there's plenty of teams in college football and schools in college football that have the resources to do it. Washington, it's always like, there's always the perception of, oh, well, Washington is competing with Oregon and USC on the West Coast. And it's like, well, Washington has as much resources as those other two programs. Now you're going to the Big Ten, where schools have even more. And it's like, okay, now you need to make sure for certain that this bet's going to pay off. And I have no doubt that it will.
So moving forward, what do you think that just the numbers are going to look like here? Because I think we're in agreement that it's not going to reach the Lincoln Riley level, because let's just compare it to Pac-12 coaches for right now. It's not going to reach the Lincoln Riley level of 10 million, but I know Kyle Whittingham is making a little over $6.5 million per year. And then Dan Lanning's a little bit under that. Do you think that it would make him the second highest coach in the current Pac-12, or second highest paid coach? Or do you think it'll be like somewhere in the middle there?
I mean, I think it's fair to say this is going to sound a little harsh, but DeBoer should be above Whittingham by the time the contract is signed. I don't think it's going to be 10, right? But it's certainly, because if you think about it for Kalen, if you pay him $7 to $8 million per year times 5 years, 8 times 5 is what, 40, 50 million,
That'd be
somewhere
40.
in that range. Right, somewhere in that range, on top of what he was already getting, because he's making, I believe, 5 at the high end of his contract when, because each year it goes up. So I think you need to add a couple of million to that. You don't need to overpay, right? I think that gets back to what we were saying initially, that Kalen's not going to say, oh, well, Texas A&M is offering me 120, so you have to get to 130. It's like, no, you just have to, be in the ballpark of respectability and kind of match the respect that I give and that I, should have, right? Because I mean,
would hope to receive,
right, exactly. Because if you're Kalen and they come back with, hey, we'll give you 6, it's like, well, wait, I'm still like right around Dan Lanning's level, and I'm, it almost just kind of seems like right to give him 7, between 7 and 8, and because he's not Lincoln Riley, but even Lincoln Riley said, hey, that was a great hire. So I mean, he has the respect of all these other coaches. There's no reason to not pay the guy, right? It's just a matter of what does Kalen want, and I think Kalen would be fine with 7 or 8, knowing that again in a couple of years you can rework the contract to go 9 to 10 and just keep moving forward as they keep winning and the money keeps coming in, right? Because the more money that comes in that Kalen brings to the program from recruiting, fans, all that stuff, then you have more money to pay him down the line. So that's just how it works out. It's you have to give him a $2+ million raise now, add a few years onto it, and just kind of keep going every couple of years with that.
Right, because that's something where we're going to look down the line and we're going to see. I remember that there were some comments around like when the Big Ten stuff first started happening, that there was going to be somewhere between $50 and $60 million per year in just in annual revenue. And that's something you have to take into account here, where that wasn't going to happen in the Pac-12. So now that money is going to be coming in, moving forward as part of the Big Ten, that you're able to kind of just say, all right, well, we can, maybe work up to that 8-9 million per year range. And we'll get there eventually once the full weight of the Big Ten money is coming in the door.
Right. And I think that's why I could almost see it being lower at the start, like 7 to start, right, for next year and whatever.
Sure.
And then knowing that by year 2 or 3 in that deal, now you have that extra 50 million coming in. Now you can get to 8, 9, 10, right? And maybe it works. Maybe you get him, maybe do $1 million a year incremental raise, right? Like start at 7, 8, 9, 10.
Nice.
Right. Well, I mean, Nick Saban's got the best contract in college football, where anytime other head coaches get a contract raise, he has the highest average of the top 5 paid coaches in the country. So it's like anytime,
nice.
Jim Harbaugh. I mean, no, it's really nice. Even better than all these contract extensions. Jimbo Fisher.
It's being Jimbo Fisher.
I was going to say Jimbo Fisher in the first 30 days is getting 16.4, and then he's getting, I think, 7 or 8 in 120 days, and then 7.3 for the next 7 years to do nothing. He doesn't have to. Like,
no,
must be nice.
That's insane. So one thing that I think it's fantastic. One thing that I think we need to talk about in the same vein too, where it's a little dicey in terms of just Washington like state law in terms of where NIL is right now, but I'm sure that's something that Kalen DeBoer is saying, all right, well, because we've seen both him and Troy Dannen say that we're going to fully embrace NIL, and that's something we're moving forward with. Do you think that that's something where he's just pushing for that, not necessarily in his contract, but just saying, I want some extra assurances here that that's what we're going to be working towards, just kind of on the athletic department's front, and especially since Kalen wasn't one of like the end all be all, but he did definitely have a say in who was hired as the new AD.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to what Troy said at his opening press conference, where you have to embrace NIL. You can't be scared of it. And I think his predecessor, now I'm not saying she was scared of NIL, but look at how she's struggling with the House of Troy at USC. And
she
USC
was somewhat cautious in her approach.
Yeah, and it's fine, right? Especially when you don't have
Sure.
state laws that directly say, hey, yes, you can do this. But that's also kind of why your job as an AD is to go to policymakers in the state and say, hey, and team up with Caltech, right? And say, hey, we need this for our institution, for our student athletes. Can you please find a way to work with us? Because if you don't do that, there's no reason that nobody's pushing the envelope because Pat Chung wouldn't do it at Washington State. And even if he would, he's going to need a partner on that, right? I mean, if you're Washington State and you're going, hey, can we get some lawmakers on the west side of the state to help us all the way on the east side? The first question is going to be, well, how does it also impact Washington? So Washington is the cash cow in the state, whether I like it or not. So with that being said, now they're the ones that need to be the forefront of this and say, hey, I mean, let's take it back. There was somebody that some policymaker in the state that put out Washington couldn't leave the conference without Washington State, like they had to do something. And that went as far as the same person that put the NIL bill into effect. Washington State doesn't have an NIL law, to your point. And so it's like, okay, the policymakers aren't going to do it unless you hold their feet to the fire and do it. Dannen seems like a guy who understands that more than Jen Cohen ever did.
I can definitely see where you're coming from there. And I feel like that's just a great place to leave that, because again, we do feel that this extension is coming, and maybe by the time this podcast is released, it's already happened. So, hey, you're welcome for seeing into the future here when we get all the numbers exactly right and everything. But on the other side of the break, we are going to talk about Oregon State, because this is going to be a really, really big matchup between these two schools. And I feel like even that's underselling it. And we're just going to review the history, because this could be the last time these two teams play for quite a while. But before we do that, we're going to send a message out to our good friends over at Prize Picks, because I love talking about fantasy football. And Prize Picks, it's just the most fun you can have, winning up to 25 times your money this football season. And now you can play during basketball season too. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on the projected stats, and place your entry. It's that easy. And with the basketball season here now, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league which is specifically created for the combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. I like that a lot. And testing your skills on Prize Picks is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. And if you want to go get on the action, all you have to do is go to prizepicks.com/lockdowncollege and use code lockdowncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/lockdowncollege and use code lockdowncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, we back. Let's talk about Oregon State, Lars. You had a great idea suggesting this and just kind of, relishing the history of this matchup a little bit, because the Northwest Corridor, the whole matchup, it's a lot of fun to make sure that we talk about all this. And so do you want to kick us off and we just kind of get through it and just how everything that we've seen for however long it's been now, too long, just is going to impact all of this?
Yeah, because I mean, it's crazy to think this is certainly going to be the last year they play annually. No question about it. And I would maybe every couple of years you throw in a non-conference game in there. But looking back at this rivalry, it's kind of funny to see how Washington had dominated it from 2013 to 2018, 13 to 18. So basically the prime run of Chris Peterson's time at Washington. The interesting thing is that John Donovan scored more points than Ryan Grubb did against Oregon State last year.
That is stunning.
Because Washington, and here's the thing. Oh, no. Actually, nope, I correct that. It was the same amount, because they lost in 27, 24, but they both scored 24 points, right? They lost 27, 24, 21, and won 24, 21 last year. And that was the thing the coaches said on Wednesday, was that this was a close game last year. People forget that. And it's like, if it not for a couple of calls going Washington's way and the clock running out towards the end, Oregon State might win that game. And then that changes a lot for last season. And I know that was an early win last season, but it's one of those where, hey, that's almost like the Arizona
that was
game.
Early. That was early, because that was right before the Oregon game. Right.
Early in the sense of when the season matters, right? To your point, but yes, to your point, that it's one of those games where it's like, okay, it looks bad, but it's actually a compliment, right? Arizona looked bad initially, now it's a compliment, and it's like this season again. Now Oregon State's even better. So now this is a game where, and you said it before the season, got to give your hat tip, where I thought Oregon State would be good this year. I didn't think they would be this good, and I don't think a lot of people did. So I think it's a matter of, now that this is the final one, you're chasing a final Pac-12 championship, you're chasing all this stuff, you can't slip up in your final matchup against Oregon State, just like you can't slip up in the Apple Cup, which the Apple Cup is obviously less slip up this year, especially. But both of these games are always going to be tough games. And so it's a matter of just making sure to leave the history exactly where you want it. Because if you go into the Big Ten and your last season was and you lost your national championship hopes to Oregon State, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. So I think it's a matter of you look at all the purple in terms of on the Wikipedia page, Washington winning. Oregon State had a good run in the mid 2000s and Washington was down, but Washington has dominated this rivalry. Do not let 2021 repeat itself.
Right. And that's the big thing. It's going to be a sold out stadium down there. And with their one bit as one of our colleagues who I will not name to not throw them under the bus said yesterday of the chainsaw, the staffers running around at practice yesterday at the very end, just shoving the speaker with the chainsaw, just blaring in players' faces was so funny. And I like that because that is Oregon State's thing. And just between what Jamarcus Shepard was saying today on Wednesday about how the Washington wants that adversity and they want all the negative talk coming their way, and just everything with not only that, because you can add in the whole Pac-12 thing, right? And the fact that people, it's not necessarily the reality of the situation, but Oregon State and Washington State claim that Washington and Oregon left them out to dry, which is not the case because USC and UCLA killed the conference. But I think that, I think that all plays into this, right? And all this history that, as you said, a whole lot of purple on that page, and Washington just kind of needs to get over that hump one more time. We talked about on our Wednesday show, as we record this, we talked a lot about how Washington is within striking distance of 12-0. And we got a lot of comments saying, oh, well, you guys put this out too early. It's like, well, no, like, it has nothing to do with Oregon State. We're not running down Oregon State when we say that. But it's there's just it's within grasp for the first time in a long time. And there is so much that could happen. You can't eat, no matter how good Oregon State is. This is like, this is for all the marbles, really, in a certain sense.
Yeah, I mean, you could frame it as this is the Pac-12 championship semifinal.
Right.
In the sense of, hey, if you win this game, you're more likely than not to clinch your spot in the Pac-12 championship game.
You do clinch with a win.
Right. And you still, but to finish that point of that, you can still win next week, right? If you lose to Oregon State and beat Washington State, you still clinch a spot in the Pac-12 championship game. But now your other goals have fallen apart, and
that's fair.
Maybe not fallen apart, but now you no longer control your tougher. Right, and it goes out of your hands, right? Because if Washington wins the Pac-12 at 12-0, 13-0, they're in the playoffs, and it's not a question. Like you don't keep an undefeated Pac-12 champion out, right? At this point, but at this point, you can, because hey, the resume doesn't look as good. I don't agree with that, but I'm just saying, like, all the arguments that are being made and really the lack of respect that is being paid to Washington from the college football playoff committee's perspective. Okay, you can take that as motivation and say, hey, we won another top 10. And this is what I was telling somebody before practice ended, where Washington will have won 3 top 25 games in a row. Florida State hasn't won 3 top 25 games all season.
Yep.
Never mind if you want to count Arizona. Never mind if you. That's, by the way, that 3-game win streak doesn't count Oregon.
Right.
So throw in that 4th, and then if you want to get, creative and
talk
throw
about
in Arizona. Right. Because it wasn't a top 25 at the time, but certainly have played their way into it, and they look good in that game. So that was kind of their building block. Now. Right. So and Utah's still in the top 25. So it's like, okay, the teams they beat, it's not like they were overrated. They might have been underrated to a degree. So now you're getting a number 11, which is kind of a backhanded way of saying this isn't a top 10 matchup. Love the committee doing that. So take the disrespect. Play like you did against Michigan State. Leave no doubt. Just this is a game to where DJ Uyunglele is good. Damian Martinez is fantastic. They have a great
line is unbelievable.
But at the same point, this is a game for Bralen Trice to say, hey, you know what? Let me show up. Zion, let me show up. Voy, let me show up. Javon Parker, let me show up. Eddie, let me show up. Somebody in the secondary show up. Like, this is a game where, okay, if you hear the disrespect, show how you handle disrespect on the field. And this is a smart team. They're not going to get like, physical and start throwing punches. It's like, no, we're just going to beat the brakes off you like we did in Michigan State.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. And I feel like that's a really great place to end it. You always have these great final thoughts. I'm like, I want to get one more thing in here, but I don't know if there's a better way to follow that up. So I feel like we should just leave that there. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. And to all the everydayers out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. And if you're new to the channel, again, hey, welcome. If you like the content, you want to make sure that you never miss anything from us, please feel free to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. Please like the show, like the video, leave us a 5-star review on audio only. Follow us on Twitter. That's where we put out stuff every single day. Ask us questions. We like to reply to as many of you as we possibly can in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on